Thank you for joining our session. Southeast Asia has become the next opportunity. Core Capital being the local office in the Philippines for Gobi partners, we are here to talk about the second largest population in ASEAN and why it's gaining relevance and impact in the region. So this session, we bring in Roland Ross and Rexy Navarro of Kumu, our portfolio company, a social entertainment platform that amplifies Filipino creativity, community, and commerce. With over 7 million users visiting 60 million times per month, I'm super excited, really good friends of mine, and we will be discussing about why the Philippines is turning heads through the rise of hyperlocal startups like Kumu. So Roland and Rexy, welcome to the session.
Hey guys.
Awesome. So let's start with a few questions, and we want to keep it light. I know our audiences would want to know more about what you guys have been doing and also what's happening in the Philippines. So maybe we'll start with the background. I think I met Rexy first before Roland, and really the convergence with Kumu for us started out due to Rexy's work with Kaya Collaborative. I'm sure you know about this, Rexy. And Kaya Co was really bringing the Filipino Americans back to the Philippines to honor and learn their motherland's rich history and culture. And I think this was a fitting conversation to talk about, what's needed, or at least what made the influence for Kumu to be existing today. And with Roland, I think having met Roland after the first meeting with Rexy, I knew he was a purpose-driven founder, and I just found out that he's an advisor to multiple purpose-driven startups. And just, pointing all the directions and connecting the dots, we really saw the synergy and vision they bring to the table. And that's why we have Kumu now. So maybe Rexy and Roland, maybe we can discuss, how you guys started with Kumu and where you guys are at right now.
Yeah, no, I thank you so much for having us. And exactly it, I was so inspired by Rexy's work. And because I actually personally went through a life-changing experience in college where I studied abroad for a few months, and I just fell in love with the Philippines, and I knew someday I'd come back. And so when I met Rexy 10 years later, telling me about his project with Kaya Co, it was a really exciting time seeing people quitting, rejecting their job offer at Amazon and instead starting an AI company in Makati. Or instead of being an investment banker in New York, they would come back to the Philippines and help a family business in Metro Manila. And so when you were looking at that, I think it was Rexy when we had this conversation with the Philippine ambassador to the United States, Jose Quisha, and he made an argument that we love your back and forth cadence, but Roland, when you're in the US, you're an entrepreneur with advertising technology experience and those types of things. But when you go to the Philippines, you're mostly engaged in community service work. And he made an argument that if you actually moved to the Philippines and created technology jobs by building a startup, maybe that might be the way that you would have more of an impact in the country. And it really stuck with us, and that was really a lot of that kind of foundation and motivation to help build Kumu. Or yeah, Rexy, if you wanted to provide more context to that.
Yeah, I mean, from my side, I was born in the Philippines. I was born in Dumaguete City, which is kind of in the southern part of the Philippines. I lived there for about 11 years before I moved to the U.S. and kind of in this place where I was one of 4 Asian kids, 2 Filipinos out of a high school of 1,200. So spent kind of naturally the middle school, high school trying to not be Filipino, and then college, finding my way back to like Filipino culture in the Philippines. And at the end of that, I realized that those two things, Filipino culture and being Filipino on one side, and the international development, economics, those sides of things, had a lot to gain from being kind of explored together. But for the most part, from like the U.S., from Rhode Island, from Brown, in that context, there weren't many places to kind of explore that. So as Carlo mentioned, that ended up driving me to start this nonprofit right before about 5 years, kind of going back and forth between the Philippines and the US, just recruiting global Filipinos to come back here. And kind of in that process, like learned more and more about this. I think 3 things that were happening. 1 or 3 kind of key insights. One was just that there's so much kind of leadership and creativity and just like community and just people who are kind of just waiting to be unlocked, right, in terms of our full potential here in the Philippines. You have more than 100 million people locally, and that's not small, right? That's like in the top, I don't know what percentile, but one of the largest kind of countries and populations in the world. On the second point, this population of 100 million, we're all going through this particular moment in time where everything from urbanization to technology infrastructure being built to slow but important shifts in and everything from policy to socioeconomic changes were happening all in this period of this past decade. We're still halfway there in terms of where that could be, right? In terms of the infrastructure that's being built, changes in the overall national economy. And the third aspect was just this powerful diaspora, which Roland and I had spent a good chunk of our life, or all of his life in Roland's case, kind of living in these 10 million Filipinos that were living outside the Philippines. That 10 million people, and you multiply them by the GDP per capita of the countries where they live, that's actually just as big, if not bigger, of an economy as the entire Philippines. So you're looking at actually kind of two countries in one, in a sense, or at least you're undersizing or most of the world is undersizing the size of the Philippine economy by at least half, because you're not thinking about the global diaspora. And kind of at the end of that was realizing that there was an opportunity for not just a program that would bring a couple of people back each year, but really a platform and a technology play that could unlock the global Filipino community at scale. And that's when kind of Roland reached out.
Let's move on to the next question. And I love the segue there of the journey towards from how you guys met up, talked about what you guys can do for the Philippines and the diaspora and all the experiences that you've had. And this really brings me down to like memory lane of where the ecosystem really started. And allow me to indulge everyone. I think the Philippines really started out as a fragmented or nascent period of technological adoption. So we call it the first wave was when online games were a thing. So there were only two things that really spurred adoption during the first wave. That was online games like Ragnarok, all the way to like Chica, which is like a VoIP tool for Filipinos to call their loved ones abroad. And we saw that as a way for people to be introduced to the internet because there was value to it. And then all of a sudden, we saw after a few years, we saw the second generation. These are the Calibers who went to Y Combinator, the first Filipino startup who went to Y Combinator. We had Lendo, we have SurePass that went public. And then you had the Rocket Internet people, the Lazadas coming in and really paving the way for the third generation. And I guess I'd love to hear your thoughts as being the third generation, seeing what they've created and also your struggles as you start building, this exponential growth that you guys done over during the pandemic. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, a lot of it is the fact that you on top of the young population, I always talk about the two other macros that are going on in the Philippines, the billions of dollars that are actually being spent on internet infrastructure. So while there's a lot of, public kind of outcry of the speed of the internet, it's actually improving. We just moved up 10 spots this year. The average upload I saw, according to Ookla, was around 32 megabytes. So the thing is, people are still ignoring the fact that 4G LTE is actually available to most of the country. And on top of that, you have Vivo, Oppo, Huawei, and Xiaomi creating iPhone spec phones for only $100. This is a perfect storm for a young population to actually engage in a mobile-first economy. I think I always point to that. And when we were actually being mentored by Daudo Banato, the Filipino-American venture capitalist out in Silicon Valley, it's not just timing and operating plan, but always focus on the team. And to answer your question, that's where I think that previous generation was really super helpful. A lot of folks from Zalora, Lazada, Shopee actually make up some of the key people on our leadership team because we were able to inherit a lot of folks who were able to really operate at a level that actually matches some of the other people that we're hiring from, which is now Facebook, Uber, LinkedIn, and things like that. And so, when looking at the team on top of the opportunity of these two macros, it's been super helpful for us.
Yeah, to the point of the kind of the first and second wave, right? I think one of the biggest role that that's played for kind of our third wave is really, I guess in a sense it's kind of a rehearsal and practice and preparation, right? So on the talent side, that means you have these groups of people who have had experiences, whether it was as Filipino startups or more often like as regional arms of regional startups or regional arms or country offices of US or China based companies. You started to have this, yeah, a handful to a couple dozen people who've had experience like building a startup team and growing a tech business model from zero to in some rare cases reaching kind of millions of users. And that's the kind of experience that's really lacking in some ways. More importantly, is just it just unlocks a lot of things when you get somebody with that type of perspective to join your team, right? Because of that first and second wave, we had a couple of generations of people, of organizations and talents that we can recruit from to do that. And then on the ecosystem side is that now you have kind of investors and funders who've also had their own years or a decade in some cases of learning and seeing what works. And just kind of, I think the more important thing there is just building risk tolerance, right? And knowing how to support and how not to support in a sense, in terms of just how to be a actual positive force in the ecosystem. The flip side of that though is that you also kind of have on the talent side kind of people who've been in the startup community but aren't they more from a perspective of having been involved or connected to the right names, but aren't necessarily the most important people to be working with. And then you have some like more conservative like funds and ecosystem people that, because of the more like negative cases that they've seen, right, are bringing a more conservative view to the table. And so in those cases, it's more of like unlearning some things. But I think net, it's really the past two generations have brought us a lot of people who are more geared to take on the opportunities that are in front of us now.
Awesome. And I think that's where everything is so exciting post pandemic. And I'd love to, pull out some numbers. App Annie's data shows that Kumu has become the Philippines' top grossing app. And allow me to just share this with the audience. And that means Kumu is the number 5 in Hong Kong, number 6 in Australia, number 6 in Canada, number 7 in Singapore, number 8 in Norway, number 11 New Zealand, number 12 in UAE, number 14 in Switzerland, and number 18 in United States. Which leads me to my favorite topic when talking to startups is social impact, right? We talk about impact, and you guys really intended to make this social app to really connect Filipinos in creating this safe space where Filipinos can share about their language, their identity, talk to people from their specific dialects. And I feel like this whole boiling pot of things have created this massive use case that there is a bigger total addressable market. And I'd love to hear, I think one of the crowning moments for me talking to you guys was when you guys lit up every single time I asked how many Filipinos that are either abroad or in the province that we've never heard about are actually making a living wage that's providing for their family and then some for their other families. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that and how that could create this bigger ecosystem for the Philippines.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of our key metrics when it comes to really building the creator economy is what we call the financially successful creator, or an FSC, which is about at least at the very bottom twice the minimum wage here in the Philippines, to as high as we actually have some of our top earners earning well over 20,000-30,000 US dollars a month. And that's actually why I really appreciate you talking about us being able to build authentic community globally, because by generating a lot of revenue from those global markets, I think right now our FSCs, we just recently celebrated 1,000 full-time earners who are creating content on Kumu, and right now on the part-time side, closer to nine or 10,000 people who are earning a part-time income. And for us, what we've noticed is it's very key to our scaling that we are not a one-to-many platform. So our monetization isn't advertising focused. So because of it, it's not a one-to-many like say like a TikTok or a YouTube. You're actually creating content and forming tribes or forming communities around your content or whatever you're passionate about. So something that's very helpful. I think Andrew Chen had written or published an article about the passion economy. And so when you do communities at scale, uh, it then points to our microtransaction business that is really around monetizing through the generosity of that community and us pulling a margin from that interaction of community supporting the streamers. So as we continue to grow that 1,000 content creator base, Kumu actually grows from a sustainability perspective because we're actually powering a content creator economy where, you know, if this is what we're at 1,000, imagine what it would be at 3,000, 5,000, ultimately at least 10,000 content creators who earn a full-time income.
Yeah, and I mean, yeah, I think that's something that we were super excited about when we crossed that mark. Actually, just last month of 1,000 people who are earning a full-time income. At the same time, it's still like that's still small, right? In the big picture of things, like what's 1,000 people to 100 million Filipinos, and so I think what we're really excited about is getting that to continue to grow and grow beyond just that category over the next few years. So, you know, I think on one side is really just making Kumu the platform to be a creator and earn a living as a creator in the Philippines, and that's not just like 1,000 live streamers earning a full-time income to 10,000 live streamers earning a full-time income, but that can really be an industry of people who are doing things in music, people who are doing things in all kinds of creative sectors and earning not just through virtual gifts, but also as e-commerce sellers, also as people who are earning recurring incomes through subscriptions. And then more zooming out from like 3 to 5 years is like, how can we make this not just this particular platform, but really an ecosystem, you know, that serve needs of Filipinos. When you look locally at the like in an industry like the business process outsourcing, like call centers within the Philippines, and how much of the national job creation that's made, I think that's where we'd like to be, at least in terms of the magnitude of the impact we're making. And I think the 1,000 full-time earners is just the first step to getting there.
Cool. Thank you so much for that. And I think with the Core Philippine Fund, you know, we've been looking for the best startups that really understand all the fundamentals, right? And we've been so lucky to have you guys on board, Education and Maria Health, that thrive during this pandemic, even today. I'd love to hear your thoughts, and I think this is one of the key anchors that we saw of, you know, what makes a startup in the Philippines successful is really tapping on the Filipino culture, right? I think you guys really captured that cultural market of OFWs, you know, Filipinos, Philams that have not been to the Philippines but want to know about the Philippines. Of course, Filipinos are known for karaoke's and singing, and we see that always in your platform. You have Pinoy Big Brother now and all that. Would love to hear your thoughts on why that's really relevant when we talk about, you know, the new age of the tech ecosystem in the Philippines.
A lot of things for us is really what's interesting is the fact that social and singing, you know, is really strong in the Philippines, and this sense of community. And really, the Philippines is one of the largest senders of remittance as a diaspora. And what's really beautiful about the content that we're seeing is that it actually, ironically, became our biggest defensibility of building this, because if you're not paying attention to the geolinguistic diversity of the Filipino culture, whether it's Bisaya, Ilocano, Kapampangan, you know, Bicolano, entire sections of geolinguistic beauty and culture, Kumu would actually lose that distinction. And by actually embracing that, that actually became our biggest defensibility, because now by creating communities around that, we're not trying to be like a TikTok or a YouTube or whatnot, or even an Instagram or a Twitter, because there's something really unique about what we built. And by doubling down on that, it actually puts us in a position to grow our community so distinctly that when we decide to go into an adjacent business, like say e-commerce or music or gaming, or even call it experiential retail, whatever the case may be, or even a fintech play, right? It's really like, look at Kakao and the way they were able to localize. When they leverage their social community and decide, you know what, we're gonna go and do an Uber. They beat Uber within a year. Oh, let's launch a digital bank. Boom. They became it's now a publicly traded and the largest digital bank in Korea. Or even look at VNG Corporation and the way they have prioritized and localized Vietnamese culture and built an app ecosystem around them. So I think for us, that is the biggest defensibility, is that Kumu is not just a live streaming app, but what we hope to be is a consumer internet business that could really prioritize that beautiful distinction that makes it different.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'll add is, kind of on one side, as Roland mentioned, one side of the coin is just how deep and specific and tight knit in like small circles Filipino culture can be. But then the other side of the coin is like how, if you're able to unlock that, like Filipino culture can be also just the complete opposite in a sense, right? Which is kind of broad and broadly applicable and diverse and ubiquitous in a way that every Filipino around the world, or every like person around the world almost has like a Filipino best friend or a Filipino nanny, or knows about Filipino culture in some way through like Manny Pacquiao or Miss Universe or whatever it is. So I think that's the other kind of really interesting thing for Filipino culture to us, is how by localizing and focusing and elevating like the uniqueness of Filipino voice, you can actually get a foothold in like a broader global culture.
Yeah,
And we're starting to see that in like in small ways, right? I think, Roland, you have a
yeah, because one of the strongest use cases we're seeing, Carlo, are non-Filipinos downloading Kumu because they're practicing their Tagalog. I just saw someone from Mexico downloading Kumu because she was searching a place to learn Tagalog. There's a 100% person who's like Welsh, not even half Filipino. She's 100% Welsh in the United Kingdom, and she's embracing Filipino culture like any global teenager would when following K-pop or J-pop. And it's really interesting. And if you think about the implications of what that means our total addressable market now becomes limitless to the imagination of the power of Filipino culture globally. And so that's something that's like super interesting that we're just scratching the surface on.
Awesome. And I think, when you guys talk about Filipino culture, the first few things that came out in mind are singing, hip hop dancing, and warm hospitality. And we've been known to be warm. We don't say how are you when they come to your house. They say, have you eaten? And even then, right? I think those are very significant things that would drive the community moving forward. And I guess just to wrap up, I'd love to hear your thoughts on what's next. What's next, and why Kumu has become a local, global, and social startup for the years to come.
Yeah, again, it really is that consumer internet play as we continue to innovate and find adjacent businesses. Because yes, when talking to global growth investors, we also see a game plan on how to capture attention span for Gen Zs and millennials for emerging markets with large Gen Z and millennial diaspora who send billions of dollars back home. And so if you actually multiply that, it's actually 12 or 13 additional markets and a population footprint of at least 2 to 3 billion people. And so that's actually the age-old thing that we have to actually solve is, do we go that route and have an impact and actually coach, train, and find equally as passionate entrepreneurs and invest in these types of business opportunities to go into other markets? Or do we double down like a consumer internet champion like Kakao or VNG, where they are by far the most dominant or actually, sorry, I don't like using that word, sustainably long-term and enduring business for that particular market for many years to come. And what's really interesting when I do look at, say, like the Douyin TikTok example, if you notice when you look at Douyin is a very deep app that really has multiple kind of features built for the Chinese market, but the global equivalent, which is TikTok, utilized its product to be able to march across the world. And so there are use cases where you can do both at the same time, but quite frankly, we just don't have the resources to do both at the same time, and we just have to double down and focus on what that culture is. So I guess to answer your question, we do understand the strategies to be there long term, but for a team to build defensible execution, you have to be focused. And so by far, Kumu has to be focused to endure for the long term, because we know that there's several options at play, but the worst thing that we could be doing is not be focused and be irrelevant. So
Yeah, that's exactly it. Kind of on the long term, we say one of the things we say internally, or at least between me and Roland, is like 10 centavos, right? So it's like 10 cent, but like the Filipino version. um, and that's kind of like the long term vision of really being an ecosystem, like not just like about the stuff that we're building ourselves, but like how do we play a larger role in supporting the growth of the Filipino kind of tech ecosystem and industry, and both in the things that we build and the things that we eventually support in and invest in. But in the short term, to kind of earn our way there is just kind of a relentless focus on growing like what's right in front of us and hitting the goals that are right in front of us. And I think what bridges that is the short term and long term is just trying to get the best people and building the culture that supports those people best to be able to build this enduring Filipino company.
Thank you so much, guys, for being part of the session, and really thank you for wrapping it up. Just to distill everything, it's all about community, and pun intended, Kumu community. It's really what it stands for. And what if you want to go alone, you'll go fast, but if you want to go together, you'll go further. And I think that's what we want. And we really appreciate your time, Roland and Rexy. We look forward to seeing you guys, and thank you so much for helping out and building the next future of the Philippines. Thanks, guys.
awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlo.
Thanks, Carlo. Thank you for having us.